The vast majority of missing people are found very quickly, but the more mysterious and strange a disappearance is, the less likely it seems to be solved. At about 7 p.m. on December 7th, 2003, Robin Ellis left Woodland Village Pizza, where she worked in Philadelphia, to make 4 separate deliveries. She made the first delivery, but at some point after that, Robin vanished. She didn't return to the pizza parlor, and she hasn't been seen or heard from since. Robin's is another case where not much information has been discovered since her strange disappearance. Her car was found 2 days after she disappeared, abandoned on Highway 95. Police said there was no sign of a struggle, but also no clues as to what actually happened. It's known that she made the first of the 4 pizza deliveries, but whether she made it to any of the others hasn't been confirmed. Presumably, the cold pizzas weren't found in her car, and if the customers hadn't received their meal, you would expect them to have complained. But as those customers didn't confirm they'd seen Robin that night, it can't be determined when exactly she disappeared. One theory suggests that Robin may have been attacked by one of her customers, but it may not necessarily have been one of the pizza deliveries that caused her mysterious disappearance. Robin allegedly may have also been working illegally as an unlicensed taxi driver. If this is the case, police believe someone she picked up may have been responsible for the disappearance. Robin's family and friends believe that she wouldn't just disappear without warning. It doesn't seem like she'd had the means to do so at the time she vanished either. The total cost of the pizzas she was delivering was only $50, not really enough to start a new life on. It's also possible no foul play was involved and this was just a strange accident. Robin is described as an African-American woman, 5'4", weighing 115 pounds. She wore glasses and her hair was in braids when she disappeared. Anyone with information should contact the Philadelphia Police Department at 215-685-3258. Stuart Isaac was 48 years old when he went on a cross-country trip to Yellowstone National Park. His car was found abandoned with the keys still inside in one of the most remote parts of the park accessible by the road. He hasn't been seen since. Given the sheer size of Yellowstone Park, it's not exactly uncommon for people to go missing there. What's strange is for those people to never be seen again. Missing NPF records all missing person cases inside US national parks. It lists only 5 people, including Stuart, who have vanished without a trace in Yellowstone Park. What's even weirder is the question of why Stuart was in the park in the first place. He wasn't an outdoorsman and lived nowhere near Yellowstone. He was actually living in Maryland at the time, and with his niece and her husband. He was a Pacific Islander with friends in Guam, had once been married and had a teenage son but had divorced from his wife. On September 3rd, 2010, he left a note for his family saying he was going on a cross-country trip. The reason was never specified, and he allegedly said something in the note that his son could have the house, motorcycle, and anything else if he could afford to pay for it. If that was true, it definitely seemed like he didn't plan on coming back, at least for a while. The drive to Yellowstone would have taken 32 hours, but it seems Stuart broke the trip up when he called a high school friend in Guam in the early hours of September 24th. He told her he was on the way to Yellowstone. The call itself was also strange. Stuart and the friend kept in touch since leaving school, but it was usually through text messages and emails. At the time, the friend hadn't realized anything was wrong, but looking back, said that it may have been a sign that something very unusual was happening. Stuart's 2009 Lexus was found at Craig Pass in Yellowstone 2 days later during a routine patrol of the parking area. The car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. A search immediately began for the car's owner, but there was no sign of Stuart in the surrounding area. Despite extensive searches in the weeks that followed, nothing ever turned up. If Stuart had taken his own life, as some have suggested, it seems odd his body would never be found. Foul play hasn't been ruled out either, but until more clues come up, it's likely Stuart's disappearance will remain a mystery. Stuart was between 5'8" and 5'10" at the time of his disappearance, and weighed about 230 pounds. Anyone with information about what happened should contact Montgomery County, Maryland Police at 240-777-0788. Tracy Bell vanished on March 7th, 2018, and there's been little update in her case ever since. Tracy was 54 years old and worked as a secretary in the Cook County State Attorney Office. She was an incredibly reliable and hardworking woman, so when she didn't show up for work on March 6th, her coworkers were concerned. Tracy had recently been diagnosed with diabetes, and police were sent to Tracy's home in Richton Park for a welfare check. This time, they found Tracy at home, but she seemed to be disoriented, and paramedics were called to check her blood sugar levels. Happy that Tracy was safe and in good health, the police left her home. The following day, Tracy once again didn't show up for work. Again, authorities were sent to her home for a welfare check, but this time they didn't find Tracy. There was no sign of foul play, and what happened to Tracy remains a mystery. Tracy's credit cards and cell phone haven't been used since she vanished. It's not clear if these were ever recovered. It's also not mentioned if any vehicles she might have owned were found outside of her home when she vanished. There was some snowfall in the area at the time, and it doesn't seem likely Tracy would have walked very far in those conditions. As well as being a diabetic, Tracy also suffered from rheumatoid arthritis. She required medication for both conditions. Her cousin also told media at the time that Tracy had been suffering from pneumonia the month before. One possible explanation for her mysterious disappearance is that she fell ill and collapsed, but if this is the case, it doesn't explain why she was never found. There have been no updates since Tracy first disappeared, leaving behind far more questions than answers. Tracy was 5'8" and weighed between 150 and 200 pounds when she vanished. She was last seen wearing a dark-colored jacket and dark pants. Anyone with information about her disappearance should contact the Richton Park Police Department at 708-481-8956. The strange disappearance of Loy Evitz is Kansas City's longest missing person case, and it doesn't seem like this unsettling mystery will be solved anytime soon. Loy vanished without a trace on the 28th of February, 1977, while on her lunch break. She was 29 years old, married, and didn't seem to have any personal or financial problems when she went missing. The final hour of Loy's life before she disappeared is pretty well documented. She worked as a secretary at a legal office on the County Club Plaza in Kansas City. Her lunch hour was between 3 and 4 p.m., and she needed to run a few errands during it. First, she had her white gold square-faced watch adjusted at a jeweler's, then browsed some of the stores on the plaza. She then drove her yellow sports car to a store on Main Street, where she purchased coffee and an umbrella. It wasn't a long journey, but according to friends and family, Loy loved her car and would drive it whenever that was an option. The car was found in its usual parking spot at the Country Club Plaza, the umbrella still in the front seat, but Loy never made it back to work. Loy's boss called her home at about 6 p.m., asking why she never came back. Loy's husband, Donald, was home and couldn't give an answer. He was naturally worried, and when Loy didn't come home that evening, he contacted police. Police interviewed hundreds of people and followed up on about 1,000 tips, but they constantly ran into dead ends during the investigation. They wanted to find out the last thing Loy had typed before her lunch break, but the typewriter she'd been using had already been used since then, and police couldn't get the information they needed. Investigators were convinced Loy had been abducted. If anyone saw anything suspicious at the time of her disappearance, that information hasn't been made public. But the thought that she ran away didn't seem likely. 12 days after Loy disappeared, her purse was found by children looking for a lost dog under a bridge in southeast Kansas City. Some of her other belongings were found, but there was no sign of a body or an explanation as to what had happened. Over the years, police have only arrested one person for Loy's disappearance, a 34-year-old man arrested 3 weeks later. He was released without charge. Loy's husband has been ruled out. He never remarried or began dating again, and continues to live in the bungalow that he once shared with his wife. This strange and mysterious case remains open, but detectives have exhausted all leads and the investigation is suspended until someone comes forward with information. At the time of her disappearance, Loy was 5 foot 5 inches tall, weighed 126 pounds, and had strawberry blonde hair. She also had a scar on her abdomen. Anyone with information should contact Kansas City Police at 816-234-5136. The strange disappearance of Jim Donnelly seems like something out of a mystery novel, but it's all too real for his family and friends. Jim has been missing since 2002, when he vanished under very mysterious circumstances while at work at the Glenbrook Steel Mill in New Zealand. Jim worked as a scientist. He was a husband and loving dad to his 2 young children, and through most of his life, he and his family had been completely ordinary. But not long before he vanished in June of 2004, Jim started acting strangely. There was obviously something going on in his life, something he didn't want his wife to know about. He was worried about something and incredibly anxious. When his wife tried to take his mind off of things with a weekend getaway, he canceled because he had a work meeting on that Saturday. He rented a suit for the occasion, which his wife found very odd, and told her that he might be physically fragile afterwards. But when he came back, there wasn't a scratch on him. The next day, he took his son to the driving range and returned in a panic and told his wife that he was going to avert a crisis. He disappeared again and didn't return home that evening. Jim's wife met with his friend Steven, and they discussed having a guys' night out to see if he could try to find out what was going on in Jim's life. But they never got that chance though. On June 21st, 2004, Jim left home for work as usual. He stopped on the way to put gas in his car and bought a muffin for breakfast. He arrived at work as usual, but didn't park in his usual parking spot. He signed in, went to his desk and put his muffin down, then went to change into his work clothes. It was the last thing anybody knows Jim did. Steven called the mill to speak to Jim. He'd just learned that Jim's car had been seen at his place of work the night before and that a man had been caught trespassing. He wanted to make sure his friend was okay, but he was told that Jim wasn't at work. Steven and Jim's wife both began to panic. Eventually, a search of the car park turned up Jim's car, and it was clear that he had arrived to work, but the mill believed that he had since left the premises. Jim's friends and family aren't so sure that that's the case. At first, it was believed that he may have had an accident at the site, but a search of the mill turned up nothing. The night of the disappearance, a dark-colored car pulled up alongside Jim's in the parking lot. When the person inside saw the police presence, they decided to leave. Jim's family believed this person was involved in the disappearance and may have been preparing to move Jim's car to make it seem like he had left the mill, not realizing that he had already been reported missing. 5 days later, Jim's hard hat was found beside an acid vat in a restricted section. It was a section that had already been searched. The chemicals in the vat weren't enough to dissolve a human, and the vat was drained, figuring that Jim was inside. They found his work ID, Palm Pilot, safety glasses, credit card, cash, and his work key. Jim's car and house keys weren't in there, and neither was Jim. It was the last new clue in the case that has ever come up. For almost 20 years, Jim's loved ones have asked what's happened to him. His wife believes that something was going on at the mill, which is why Jim was acting so strangely before he disappeared. Someone likely knows what happened to Jim, and where he or his remains are to this day. Anyone with information that could solve this mysterious disappearance should contact Crime Stoppers at 0800-555-111. Everyone is familiar with the Bermuda Triangle and the spates of mysterious disappearances that happen in its waters. But hidden away in Alaska, there is another triangle similar to that of Bermuda. This triangle is at the center of hundreds of missing person cases, and the estimate stands at 16,000 cases. Experts and investigators have tried for years to get to the bottom of the mystery, and while they search for an explanation, a creepy urban legend has surfaced that may explain everything. The first recorded disappearance in the Alaskan Triangle was in 1972 when the plane of US politician Hale Boggs and Nick Begich mysteriously vanished after flying from Anchorage to Juneau. According to the legend, the Alaskan Triangle stretches from Barrow in the very north down to Anchorage and then down to Juneau. When the politicians failed to arrive at Juneau Airport, a large search of over 40 military aircraft and countless other volunteers was launched. According to sources, the searchers scoured 32,000 square miles but found no sign of the plane or those on board. After this incident, the legend of the Alaskan Triangle was born, and some people became wary about traveling to Alaska. This didn't put everyone off though, and each year, reports came in about missing hikers and pilots, only adding to the urban legend of the Alaskan Triangle. The local people of Juneau came forward with a rather creepy explanation behind the mysterious disappearance. They claimed that an urban legend called Kushtaka could be responsible. According to the legend, the Kushtaka are shape-shifting otters that take on the appearance of men and lure people in, making sure their spirit never ascends. These shapeshifters have a nefarious purpose and are often known to approach those who are lost or injured in the Alaskan wilderness, offering them protection and warmth. Some experts have speculated that the harsh conditions of the Alaskan wilderness are to blame for the high numbers of disappearances, but others aren't so convinced. Along with the bizarre disappearances, tales of UFO sightings have poured out of the triangle, adding another layer of mystery to the area. Our world is full of mystery, and with the unknown looming in every corner, anything is possible. On May 1st, 1971, Bobby and Elizabeth Ford were in their home in Arkansas when they were awoken by a mysterious creature trying to get into their house through the screen window. According to Elizabeth, the creature reached through the screen and was able to alert Bobby, who, with his brother Dan, sprung into action and chased the creature away. The trio had no idea what they had just witnessed, but believed that the terrifying encounter was the end of it. A few hours later, the mysterious creature returned to the house once more and attacked Bobby. Bobby was subsequently sent to the nearest hospital, and an investigation was opened. When the police spoke to Elizabeth and Dan, they described seeing a huge hairy creature that stood between 7 and 8 feet tall and was around 300 pounds. As the word spread about the incident, residents came forward and told the trio that they just had an encounter with the mysterious urban legend known as the Bogy Creek Monster. Stories of the Bogy Creek Monster can be traced all the way back to 1834, when the residents of Arkansas reported seeing a huge, hairy creature in the wilderness. As the years passed, more and more residents came forward to share their experiences and encounters, and thus the legend of the Bogy Creek Monster was born. The residents became wary about walking through the wilderness and told their children of the urban legend of the Bogy Creek Monster. Following the attack on the Fords, investigators found 3 toed footprints around the side of Ford's house, along with scratches to the exterior of the home. In the minds of the local people, this was solid proof that the monster had been there, and people began to panic, wondering whether they could be the monster's next victim. Many have suggested that the Bogy Creek Monster isn't a monster at all, but large black bears. The monster is described as a bipedal, and while bears usually walk on all fours, they can raise up onto their back feet. The people in the area are unwavering in their belief of the Bogy Creek monster, and do not believe that black bears are behind the creepy urban legend. A small museum has been set up in the Monster Mart gas station, where visitors can look through footprint casts and audio clips from the mysterious entity. Some brave tourists have even ventured out into the swamps and wilderness, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Bogy Creek monster. With so much of the wilderness unexplored, is it possible that there are creatures out there that we haven't discovered yet? In the late 1980s, the people of Maine began noticing that food and other items were mysteriously disappearing from their cabins and homes. At first, people chalked it up to these items being misplaced or taken by their children and other family members. But as the months went on and items kept disappearing, it became obvious that something more nefarious was going on. While some people tried to find a reasonable and logical explanation, others pondered whether the legend of a hermit living in the woods was somehow true. This idea spread, and over the next 27 years, the urban legend of the hermit in the woods would remain in the public's consciousness. As the years passed, people came and went from the small towns and remote areas of northern Maine. But one thing remained unchanged: the legend of the hermit. It wouldn't be until 2013 that the residents of northern Maine found out that the urban legend had in fact been true. According to National Geographic, game warden Terry Hughes had become fed up with the string of thefts from cabins and homes. So he decided to set up surveillance cameras and catch the culprit once and for all. For weeks, Hughes trudged through the forests of Maine, and then one day he spotted him. To everyone's surprise, the North Pond Hermit actually existed, and there was some element of truth to the urban legend. It was discovered that the hermit was 47-year-old Christopher Knight. Knight was arrested after he was caught breaking into an empty summer camp, and from there, the legend spiraled. Following his arrest, Knight told his story to the world, telling the press that when he was 20 years old, he left his home in Massachusetts, drove to Maine, abandoned his car, and headed into the woods. Armed with rudimentary supplies, Knight quickly realized that in order to survive, he would need to steal, and when people began noticing that items were going missing, the urban legend of the North Pond Hermit was born. Police estimated that Knight had routinely stolen from over 100 cabins in the area and managed to get away with it for 27 years. He told investigators that for 27 years, he lived a solitary lifestyle and hadn't spoken to another person. When asked why he opted to live as a hermit, he said he wanted to get away from the world and find inner peace. The people of northern Maine were glad that the thief had finally been caught, and that the urban legend had finally been put to bed. Christopher Knight's case makes you wonder how many other hermits are living out there in the wilderness, though. The legend of Polybius is perhaps one of the most infamous gaming urban legends in the world. The legend goes that in 1981, mysterious arcade machines began popping up in arcades across Portland, Oregon. Those who played the game gave it the name of Polybius and described very bizarre things happening to them after they played it. The game was an ominous black box with no name and bright, colorful patterns on the screen, drawing users in to take a closer look. Once players started the game, they found it almost impossible to stop. The game was absorbing and addicting, and then those who had played the mysterious game began to vanish. One day, they would be in the arcade, and the next, they were gone. One person came forward and said that he was led away through a series of underground tunnels to an unknown location. The next thing he knew, he was miles away in the Tillamook State Forest. Others have also come forward with similar stories. Theories quickly arose that the mysterious game, now called Polybius, was actually a CIA experiment. According to the urban legend, mysterious men in black suits would come and take the machine away for servicing. They never spoke, and within a few days, the machine had returned. Police began speculating that the legend of Polybius was tied to the CIA's MKUltra project, where the CIA attempted to control people's minds. Players began getting ill after playing the game, only adding to the legend. Just as mysteriously as the game had appeared, though, it disappeared, fueling the conspiracy and cementing the legend in the minds of some. This urban legend stuck around in the decades that followed, and people still talk about it to this day. It's no secret that the CIA was conducting experiments in the 1950s and beyond, and some people believe it's plausible that the CIA extended their reach to the general public. Experts have theorized that the game was recalled due to people taking ill, but others aren't so easily convinced. Whether the legend is true or not remains to be seen. East of Terre Haute in Brazil, Indiana, lays the most haunted cemetery in the whole state, according to locals. While cemeteries are a hub of paranormal activities and unexplained goings-on, the 100 Steps Cemetery has another urban legend that will chill you. According to the legend, if you climb the 100 steps and follow very careful instructions, a spirit will visit you and give you chilling predictions of the future. There are different iterations of the legend, however. The most common are as follows. Under a moonless sky, a person must walk up the 100 steps to the summit of the cemetery, counting the steps as they go. When they reach the top, they'll be greeted by the spirit of the cemetery's original caretaker from the Civil War era. This spirit will then reveal to you the details and date of your passing before disappearing into the darkness. The urban legend then states that the person must descend the stairs, counting them as they go. If they count the same number of stairs as they did going up, then the details were wrong. But if someone counts 99 stairs instead of 100, then the caretaker was right. Some have attributed the difference in stairs to a paranormal entity, or that a missing stair may represent that their final step will be into hell. It's also been said that if you try to walk on the grass and trick the caretaker, you'll be knocked down by an invisible force, and a large red handprint will appear on your body. This large red mark has been seen as a sign from the devil himself. This urban legend is incredibly popular in Indiana, and the 100 stairs have since been renovated due to safety concerns. Due to the urban legend, the 100 Steps Cemetery is only open from sunrise to sunset to discourage people from taking the 100 steps to learn their fate. Those who have visited the cemetery in the daytime said that they counted 98 stairs going up, but only 96 going down. Is this proof of a paranormal entity at work? Would you be brave enough to venture into the cemetery and test this urban legend for yourself? Buff Ledge Camp in Vermont was once the site of a girls' summer camp where girls from across the state could spend their summers, engaging in various activities such as horse riding and swimming. The camp has since closed, and while a few people hold fond memories of the summers spent at the camp, others remember the camp for a much different reason. In August of 1968, Buff Ledge Camp became the site of one of Vermont's most bizarre historical mysteries. On a warm August afternoon, Michael Lapp and Janet Cornell, who both worked at the camp, were relaxing down by the boat dock as the girls at the camp were out on an activity. According to the pair, it was a normal afternoon, and they spent their time relaxing and chatting at the water's edge. They stayed there until dark, making the most of the beautiful sunset and the peace and quiet. As it turned dark, Michael and Janet noticed a bright glowing object in the distance that began to move downward and closer to them. At first, the pair thought that they were looking at Venus. However, as the bright light split off into three, they knew that they were witnessing something very different. As the lights grew closer, they began performing a light show, whizzing through the air in a well-choreographed display. Two of the lights dropped back, leaving a singular light that dropped into the lake. As this light passed over them, they realized that it wasn't a light but a UFO. Michael would later describe the sound of the craft as like 1,000 tuning forks. Just as quickly as it had entered the water, the UFO re-emerged and began flying towards them. Janet and Michael saw two childlike creatures with elongated necks, big heads, and no hair in the UFO. Before they were able to react, Janet and Michael were beamed up into the UFO. Time passed, and the next thing the pair knew, they were on their backs on the boat dock once more, watching the UFO fly away into the night. The pair refused to discuss what happened to them, and it wasn't until years later, when they underwent hypnosis, that they were able to give more details about their experience to the Center for UFO Studies. Michael told them that on that August evening, he saw Janet on a bed being poked and prodded by these alien creatures who were collecting samples from her. Janet also gave similar details when she underwent hypnosis, and UFO experts consider their testimony to be true. Their case has been heavily studied over the past few decades, and other employees at the camp did report seeing a series of strange lights over the lake on the night in question. On November 7th, 1872, Captain Benjamin Briggs of the Mary Celeste gathered his crew for one last meeting before they set sail from New York Harbor, headed for Italy. As the captain briefed his crew and answered any questions, there was no hint that anything was wrong. Little did Captain Briggs nor the crew of the Mary Celeste know that in just a month, something very mysterious would happen, changing the course of history forever. By November 25th, 1872, the Mary Celeste was on track to make it to its final destination of Italy. For what would be the last time, Captain Briggs made an entry into his log, and it wouldn't be until a week later that the mystery would be unraveled. According to sources, this final entry showed no signs of anything being wrong, which only adds to the mystery of what happened next. By December 5th of 1872, the Mary Celeste hadn't reached its destination, and those in Italy who were expecting the ship to dock were wondering what was going on. On that day, the British ship, the Dei Gradia, and her crew made a startling discovery just off the coast of Portugal. In the distance, they saw an abandoned ship aimlessly sailing around. The crew of the Dei Gradia decided to get a closer look and board the ship. Once they boarded the ship, they looked for signs of life, but found that there was nobody on board. Only one of the lifeboats was missing, and the ship's entire cargo was intact. So where was the crew, and what had happened? There was water at the bottom of the ship, but other than that, there was no indication of any trouble. In fact, the ship was still capable of sailing, and had 6 months worth of food and water on board. The crew of the Dei Gradia returned the ship to the nearest dock, and claimed a small fee from the insurers of the Mary Celeste. To some, this suggested that the crew of the Dei Gradia were somehow involved, and knew that returning the ship would lead to a lucrative sum of money. However, others aren't so convinced. Over the years, there have been numerous theories from pirates to a mutiny, and even a bizarre sea creature, but as of yet, scientists have been unable to uncover the truth behind this historical mystery. In February of 1855, England experienced snowfall, and as residents awoke and stepped outside of their homes, they cheered with glee. However, those living in Devon and Dorset in the south of England had a very different reaction. As they stepped out of their homes and prepared to go about their day, they noticed something mysterious in the snow. Residents huddled around, trying to figure out the mystery, and 167 years later, we're still no closer to unearthing the mystery only known as the Devil's Footprints. As the people of Devon and Dorset stepped out of their homes and onto the streets, they noticed cloven hoof footprints in the snow that measured 3 inches wide and were 8 to 16 inches apart. The footprints trailed everywhere, appearing on haystacks, rooftops, and walls. Reports quickly came in about the footprints from across Devon and Dorset, and it was found that the footprints had continued uninterrupted for over 100 miles. Mass hysteria quickly swept through Devon and Dorset, with residents clinging to the belief that Satan himself had walked through there at night. People were terrified and looked to any official sources for an explanation. One theory put forward was that the footprints were made by horses, while others speculated that rats and mice may have jumped through the snow and left the bizarre footprints. Over 167 years later, the experts still can't agree on the cause of the footprints. Some people believe that a large animal is responsible, and some believe that it was all a big hoax, while some are still convinced that the devil walked through Devon and Dorset that chilly February night. According to historical records, sometime around the 1350s, French knight Geoffrey de Charny discovered what has become known as the Shroud of Turin. Over the centuries, this historical artifact has been the subject of debate, and hundreds of scientific investigations have tried to determine its authenticity. Even now, in the 21st century, religious scholars and scientists can't agree, making it one of the oldest historical religious mysteries. When Geoffrey de Charny presented the 14-foot linen cloth to the dean of his church, the dean wasn't quite sure what he was looking at. Charny went on to explain that the cloth with the image of a man was in fact the authentic burial shroud of Jesus Christ. This discovery shocked the church, and soon word had spread about this miraculous discovery. The church put the item on display, and people flocked from far and wide to see it, hoping that it would be somewhat of a pilgrimage for them. This enthusiasm was quickly dampened when the Bishop of Troyes declared that the linen cloth was nothing but an elaborate hoax, but that didn't stop some people from clinging to the hope that it was real. As the years passed, the item was put on display, and still, people flocked from far and wide to get a look at the burial shroud that supposedly belonged to Jesus Christ. This exhibition proved fruitful for the church, and they were accused of faking it in order to get money. The shroud has exchanged hands over the centuries. However, its final home is the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. Since 1578, the shroud has been kept there behind a thick pane of glass. As technology has advanced, the church has upped its security measures around the item. Despite the centuries that have passed since its discovery, the interest in the cloth has not waned, and religious scholars and those who are religious still discuss the cloth to this day. In more recent times, the church has allowed the cloth to be put on virtual display in observance of Easter celebrations. In the 1980s, two groups of scientists conducted carbon dating on the cloth, with one group saying that it dated between 1260 and 390, while the other said that it was more likely from between 300 BC and 400 AD. Nobody has been able to agree whether the cloth is real or just a fake. The Catholic Church has remained neutral on the subject, and describes the item as more of an icon than an artifact. Only a very select few are granted access to the cloth, and the Catholic Church prefers to keep it under wraps where it is safe. To this day, the cloth is still a hot talking point and remains one of the oldest religious historical mysteries. In 1982, Robert Marx was diving in Brazil's Guanabara Bay when he made a discovery that would shock the entire country. Marx, who is a professional treasure hunter, was exploring underwater in the area after he had gotten word from locals that Roman treasure was hidden there. Sure enough, after digging around, Marx unearthed two large jars with handles that were used by the ancient Greeks and Romans. Stunned at what he had found, Marx contacted Dr. Harold E. Edgerton of MIT to help him verify the objects, and Dr. Edgerton concluded that the jars discovered were in fact of ancient Roman origin. The Brazilian government also demanded to see the jars, which were barnacle encrusted and could not have possibly been planted there by Marx or someone else. Before Marx was ever able to go back into the depths and conduct further research, the Brazilian government banned people from excavating the bay. The discovery of these jars brought into question whether the Portuguese really were the first Europeans to land in Brazil in the 1500s, and challenged the official history of Brazil. Scientists have since heavily debated the origin of these jars, and how they could have possibly gotten there. One theory that's been put forward states that perhaps these fell from a ship that was mutineered and driven towards Brazil, while another theory suggests that the ship may have drifted westwards during a storm. Unfortunately, these jars will remain a historical mystery until the Brazilian government opens up the bay for further examination. Marx and Edgerton stand by the fact that these jars are genuine Roman artifacts. At the start of the 1890s, Belle Miller from Springfield, Illinois, started a floral business that catered to the wealthy residents of the city. Her business did well enough to eventually cover an entire city block in greenhouses, and in 1909, she decided to use her hard-earned money to construct her dream home at 835 South 2nd Street. When the house was completed, it was visited by the area's wealthiest and most influential people, who stayed in the luxury apartments that were outfitted with large fireplaces, spacious verandas, and impressive oak detailing. In 1994, the house was renovated and the apartments were turned into opulent guest rooms. The following year, the building was added to the National Register of Historic Places. But many of the guests who have visited the property believe that Belle loved her home so much that she never left and still lovingly looks after it. Guests as well as staff have reported hearing soft but caring voices that speak, seemingly from out of nowhere. Others have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a woman moving through the house and passing through the house's doorways. On many occasions, a book that was tightly packed with others on a shelf was seen placed in the middle of the room without explanation. Another report states that the wallpaper in one of the rooms started to peel away from the wall due to age, but the following morning it had been expertly repaired, though it hadn't been done by any of the staff. The house's elevator is also known to act up, taking guests to a floor other than the one that they chose, despite the fact that it's been serviced and checked on multiple occasions and deemed to be in perfect working order. The crystal candy dish inside the house is often spoken about, as its lid can be heard being removed and replaced when no one is near it. It's believed that Belle is the cause of these unexplained mysteries, and that she is a friendly, benign spirit who decided to stay where she was happiest during her life. Due to its barren landscape and the smoke that can be seen emanating from the ground due to its smoldering underground coal deposits, the Badlands of South Dakota are known to many as hell without fire. But the nickname isn't only fitting to the scenery of the region, since there is a paranormal mystery that's known to many who have visited the area. Near to a spot known as Watchdog, many people have described seeing the haunting silhouette of a woman who allegedly lost her life there, seemingly lost and looking for help. Travelers through the area have reported seeing a woman waving her arms to get their attention. Naturally, they stop to see if she needs assistance, but she seems frozen with fear, prompting them to approach her. When they do get closer to her, she still remains unmoved and completely silent until she's asked if she's in need of help, at which point she lifts her arms above her head and starts screaming at the top of her lungs before instantly disappearing, only to be seen moments later on a nearby hilltop, wringing her hands in agony. On some occasions, people have seen the woman accompanied by a skeleton that responds to the sound of music. It's said that it would play its violin along with the music until sunrise, but then it slowly starts to fade away. Some people believe that if the skeleton is followed, it will act as a Pied Piper, using the sounds of its violin to lure people onto the nearby cliffs or canyons, where they're likely to lose their lives. On the 7th of January, 1948, the Godman Army Airfield at Fort Knox in Kentucky became the site of an unexplained paranormal mystery that ended up costing one pilot his life and became one of the most widely publicized UFO events at the time. At around 1:45 p.m. on that day, the airfield was informed by the Kentucky Highway Patrol that there was an unusual object in the sky near Madisonville. Reports also came in from Owensboro and Irvington, describing the object as between 250 and 300 feet in diameter. Sergeant Quentin Blackwell, who was in the control tower at Fort Knox at the time, spotted the object along with 2 other witnesses who were also in the tower. Base Commander Colonel Guy Hicks spotted the object through his binoculars, describing it as extremely white with a red border along its bottom section. For the next 90 minutes, it seemed to hang unmoving in the sky, and witnesses at the Clinton County Army Airfield in Ohio reported that it looked like a flaming red cone with a strange green mist trailing behind it. 4 military aircraft that were in the vicinity were told to investigate the craft, though one of them had to turn back as it was low on fuel. The other 3 planes, one of which was being piloted by Captain Thomas Mantell, gave chase and described the object as so small that it was unidentifiable. They were told by Blackwell to level their planes out in order to get a better view of the object, but Mantell ignored the order and continued to climb after his fellow pilots withdrew at 22,500 feet in altitude. There is some dispute as to the description that Mantell gave of the object, as some witnesses claim that he said it was metallic in appearance and of tremendous size, though others have reported that he never actually said this. Mantell was flying without an oxygen mask, and as he continued to chase the object, he passed 25,000 feet in altitude. This caused him to suffer from a lack of oxygen, and he lost consciousness, causing his plane to spiral towards the ground. Mantell's plane crashed on a farm south of Franklin before he would regain consciousness, and by 3:50 p.m., the strange object had disappeared. The incident was widely covered by newspapers across America, and eventually revisited by investigators of the famous Blue Book Project. An Air Force major stated that the object was, in fact, the planet Venus that was mistaken for a UFO. But these claims were later disproven, as many reports described the object as much bigger than the planet would have appeared in the sky. Others believed that it was a US Navy skyhook weather balloon, and although plausible, many people rejected this theory, as no skyhook balloons were supposed to be in the area at that time. No further explanations have ever been found, and the Mantell UFO remains an unsolved paranormal mystery. On the 20th of February, 1938, 34-year-old Alma Fielding from Thornton Heath in England invited reporters from the Sunday Pictorial newspaper to visit her house, as her family was experiencing unexplained paranormal events that they could not explain. 2 of the newspaper's reporters were sent to the house to investigate, and when they arrived, Alma opened the door. To their surprise, they saw an egg flying through the air and smashing in front of their feet as it hit the ground. As they walked towards the kitchen, a china statuette of a dog fell from a countertop onto the ground, and a can opener flew across the room about 6 feet off the ground. As they sat in the living room interviewing the woman, her teacup levitated off of its saucer and smashed into pieces mid-air. In the next moment, the saucer in her hand shattered, slicing her thumb, and while the cut was being attended to, they heard another crash in the kitchen and found that a wine glass had smashed onto the floor, despite being kept in a locked closet. Next, another egg sailed through the air and crashed into a sideboard, and a large piece of coal lifted from a grate and flew through the air, narrowly missing one of the reporters before crashing into a nearby wall. Alma told reporters that a week earlier, she and her husband had been asleep when they heard something shattering in their room. She turned on her bedside lamp and they saw that a tumbler had fallen to the ground, but immediately another glass sailed through the air and smashed against the wall behind them. Her husband, Les, told her to turn off the light so that they could see if anything else would happen, and she did so. Immediately, a strange wind blew through the room, lifting their bedsheet over their heads. Alma decided to switch the light on again, but when she hit the switch, nothing happened. Les tried his bedside lamp but got the same result, and Alma started calling for help. Her son Donald and a tenant, George, rushed into the room and had to dodge a container of face cream that flew straight at them. George was suddenly hit by a penny and a shilling and decided to run downstairs to find matches. When he returned and lit the lamp, they found that Alma's bedside lamp's bulb was lying on a chair on the other side of the room, still hot to the touch but in perfect condition. The next morning, the paranormal activity continued when Alma attended to cook breakfast. An egg inexplicably smashed and a saucer snapped in half for no reason. This is when she decided to contact the Sunday Pictorial, who ran the story with the heading, quote, "This is the most mysterious front page story we have ever printed." No one was ever able to explain the events that took place in the Fielding house, and it remains an unsolved paranormal case. Shoemaker, James Byrne Worson from Leamington in England, was a prolific long-distance runner who often irritated his friends and family by bragging about his ability to run such long distances. In September of 1873, two of his friends, Barham Wise, a dry goods merchant, and Hammerson Burns, a photographer, challenged Worson to a bet that he couldn't run from Leamington to Coventry without stopping, a distance that is widely reported in the telling of the story as 40 miles, but in fact it's closer to just 11 miles. Worson, who had been drinking at the time, jumped at the opportunity to show off his abilities, and immediately accepted the challenge. They moved out into the street, where Worson would begin his run, with Wise and Burns following closely behind in a horse-drawn carriage, so that he would be in their sights at all times. Despite the fact that he had been drinking, Worson made the first few miles of his run with great ease, at times laughing and joking with his two friends, who were doing their best to give him a hard time by heckling him. A few moments later, Worson's foot seemed to strike something in the road, and he pitched forward as he tripped. He let out a shriek as he fell, in plain sight of his two friends, and vanished into thin air before he hit the ground. Confused, the two friends started searching for him, but to no avail, and when they reported the incident, they were arrested for being intoxicated, but were soon released when it became apparent that they were completely sober. Worson was never seen again, and his mysterious disappearance still remains an unsolved paranormal mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. The red sands of the Namib Desert in southern Africa have been the source of a weird science mystery that has baffled experts for decades. Over about 1,100 miles of the desert, a strange phenomenon known as fairy circles can be seen where the grasslands form a series of barren circles, bordered by clumps of vegetation. The formation of these circles has been a mystery until recently, when mathematician and theoretical biologist Karina Tarnida started collaborating with an ecologist in an effort to better understand exactly what is causing the circles to form. Over the decades, there have been many theories put forward. The local Himba people believed that they are footprints that were left in the sand by gods, but scientists thought that a pathogenic fungus could be responsible, or that the patches are due to the fact that toxic bushes used to grow in those particular spots. Karina looked at a theory which suggested that the spots are caused when smaller plants are unable to compete for limited water in the desert. They then succumb to the arid heat as vegetation expands and thrives in one particular spot. And this theory certainly is plausible, especially when looking at satellite imagery. But upon closer inspection, it was discovered that each of these bare patches contains a termite colony under the ground. They now have theorized that as the termites burrow, the vegetation above suffers. But when two termite colonies meet, they fight for survival until one colony is eliminated. This results in a series of colonies of approximately the same size living next to each other, with a termite-free zone between them, causing the circles to form. Further study suggests that either of these theories could have the same result, but when the two were combined, they were able to recreate the entire landscape as it appears in the desert. More research will, however, be conducted to find conclusive proof through small-scale manipulation field studies in areas where termites are present, and areas where they aren't. In the 1960s, sonar operators on submarines recorded a mysterious sound in the Arctic Ocean. The sound could be heard at frequencies between 50 and 300 Hz, lasted between 1.6 and 3.1 seconds, and for decades its origin has left scientists baffled. They found that the sound, which has been nicknamed the bioduck, could be heard during the spring and winter seasons, and although they were certain that it was produced by an animal, they weren't sure which species it was. At first, it was suggested that the strange sound was being made by fish, or possibly passing ships. But new research conducted by a team led by Denise Rich from the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has finally identified the source. In 2013, acoustic tags were attached to 2 whales in the Wilhelmina Bay, and they were recorded while producing the duck-like sound. It's not yet known if there's a specific circumstance under which the whales produced the sound, but the recorded sounds were made just before they dove down to deeper waters to feed. The identification of the quack will allow researchers to track the whales' migration through passive acoustic monitoring, determining when they arrive in the Antarctic and when they leave the area again. This will also give them an insight into their numbers in certain areas and how they move between those areas. The team will also be making use of data from the Alfred Wegener Institute's Permanent Acoustic Recording Station in Antarctica to further their studies. But after decades of speculation and confusion, the mystery of the strange ocean quack is finally solved. The University of Basel, established in 1460 and located in Switzerland, has been home to a collection of papyrus documents in 5 languages since the 16th century. Contained within that collection is a fascinating papyrus document that has baffled scientists for centuries. The document, which is likely part of an art collection, was considered as unique in the field of papyrology since it had mirrored writing on both sides. But when it was examined more closely at the Basel Digital Humanities Lab with the use of ultraviolet and infrared technologies, it was found that it wasn't a single papyrus, but a set of papyri that had been glued together at some point. Researchers recruited the skills of a specialist papyrus restorer, who traveled to Basel and aided in separating the sheets so that they could be translated for the first time. Upon doing so, it was discovered that unlike other papyrus texts that usually contain letters, contracts, or receipts, this one was a literary text, making it far more valuable. The Greek text was found to describe a medical condition called hysterical apnea that's no longer recognized by modern medicine, but was considered to be a medical condition that affected women centuries ago. It's assumed that the text was created by Roman physician Galen, or by someone who was commenting on his research. Galen was regarded at the time as the most important physician after Hippocrates. The papyrus was compared to historic documents and ancient manuscripts written by Galen that were written over and reused during medieval times. They're known as palimpsests. It's believed that the Basel Papyrus could be one of these palimpsests, since the sheets were glued together and very likely used as a book binding. The discovery was made by a professor of ancient history at the University of Basel, while working on an editing project that was funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. For 3 years, she worked alongside the Digital Humanities Lab and an interdisciplinary team, and the collection of papyrus documents has since been digitized, transcribed, and annotated. One professor also believes that this discovery will inject new life into papyrus research, as their findings will now be shared with other papyrus researchers, since the text may also appear in other documents. And it will give them the opportunity to paint a bigger picture for documents that aren't as complete. In 2004, researchers working on NASA's Galaxy Evolution Explorer orbiting space telescope observed a mysterious object, unlike anything they had ever seen in our Milky Way galaxy. What they saw was a gaseous blob with a star at its center. When viewed through the telescope, the gas took on a blue hue, though it was found that it didn't actually emit any light that's visible to the human eye. Upon further study, it was found that it also contained a thick ring structure, and so it was named the Blue Ring Nebula. For the next 16 years, it was observed via space and Earth-based telescopes, but with each new discovery came more questions that baffled experts. But a new study conducted and published in the Nature Online journal in 2020 has revealed that the mystery of the nebula may have finally been solved years later. State-of-the-art theoretical models have been applied to the vast amount of data collected, and it's now been discovered that the mysterious gas cloud is very likely made up of debris from two stars that collided long ago and merged into one star. This is not an uncommon occurrence, as stars merge on average every 10 years in our galaxy. But the phenomenon is hard to study immediately after the stars collide, since they're obscured by the debris that results from the massive collision. When the star then does become visible hundreds of thousands of years later, they aren't always identified, since they're often mistaken for non-merged stars. But the Blue Ring Nebula has provided scientists with an exception, since they're able to view it only a few thousand years after the collision took place, and evidence of the merger is still abundant. It's believed that this is the first known case where a merged star can be viewed at its current early state. When the nebula was studied in 2006, researchers found that there was evidence of a shock wave within it, proving that the blue gas had indeed been expelled as a result of a violent event around the central star. They also found that a massive amount of material was being pulled into the star's surface, and at first it was assumed that there was a nearby planet that was being pulled apart by the star, causing the gas to be expelled from the system. But in 2012, the ring of debris was identified for the first time, and it was concluded that the expelled material resulted from an object even larger than a giant planet. Then in 2017, it was confirmed that there was no solid object in the star's orbit, and through theoretical astrophysics, it was found that the two stars had collided, resulting in a strange nebula. The discovery has now made it possible for scientists to identify other young stellar merger remnants in our galaxy, since the Blue Ring Nebula has given them the data to look out for. In 1976, British archaeologist Mary Celeste discovered a set of footprints known as the Laetoli footprints in Tanzania. As one set of footprints was being excavated, they found evidence that they were created by a bipedal human that dated back 3.7 million years. But another set of footprints was discovered nearby at an area known as Site A, and when they were more closely examined, it was found that they were much wider, and it was concluded that those prints were left by a young bear that was walking on its hind legs. For the next 40 years, not much attention was given to the second set of prints, as they weren't considered to be as important as the first. But a 2019 study that was conducted at Site A revealed that the set of 5 prints was in fact made by an upright walking hominid. The prints were measured, photographed, and 3D scanned to get a better idea of who had left them there. The prints were compared to those of black bears, chimpanzees, and humans, and it soon became clear that they originated from an early human. Researchers traveled to New Hampshire, where they observed how young black bears walk on their hind legs. They studied the bears for more than 50 hours and found that they walked upright for less than 1% of that time, and it was unlikely that the ancient prints were made by any type of bear. This theory was later bolstered when further excavations of Laetoli found no evidence of prints that had been left by any creature that walked on 4 legs. Associate Professor of Anthropology Jeremy De Silva has stated that bears take very wide steps as if they're waddling back and forth. This makes it impossible for them to walk with a similar gait to the prints found at Laetoli, since the shape of their knees and muscle structure in their hips will not allow it. This proves that different hominin species walked upright in the area, in different ways and on differently formed feet that contained a big toe and smaller second toe that isn't present in bears, putting to rest a mystery that has baffled experts for decades. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.